Hello, and welcome to Resilience Radio, episode 18, talking about postpartum care and good beginnings. As always, the opinions on this show are not necessarily shared by me. I like to feature a variety of different healthcare perspectives, and everyone has different needs. Additionally, nothing on this show is meant to be medically diagnostic or prescriptive in any way. So today's guest is the executive director of Good Beginnings. Great to have you on.
Hi, glad to be here.
So, could you start off by telling us a little bit about what Good Beginnings is?
Good Beginnings is a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1991 by a group of mothers in Northfield, Vermont, who recognized at the time that there was very little community support for families who were just coming home from the hospital with a new baby. That was around the time when hospital practice had changed from a 1 week postpartum period in hospital stay to 24 or 48 hours later after giving birth being discharged. So that was kind of the backdrop for their recognition that there needs to be more community support in today's society for postpartum families. And we have been going strong in Central Vermont ever since then, 30 years old now. And our model is primarily a community-based approach where we train volunteers from the same community as the family to go into the home and provide weekly support, hands-on help and support, and another adult listening ear for a family during what's called the fourth trimester, the 3 months after the birth of a baby.
Great. And what are you most proud of from the organization?
Well, I'm most proud of our longevity as a community-based organization that does rely on volunteers to donate their time to other community members. That we've been going strong for 30 years, and I'm proud of our universal approach. We are available to anyone who is caring for a new baby, and that can be an adoptive parent or a grandparent who is caring for a grandchild. It can it doesn't matter. We don't have any eligibility requirements in terms of income or what kind of family you are or what kind of health history you have. If you are a caregiver for a newborn, then you are eligible for our services. And I think that's really important, that it's that care work for the newborn that is so important. And we really center the work around that.
So, can you give an overview of the different offerings that the Good Beginnings has?
Yes. So the primary, our core program, which I've alluded to, is the Postpartum Angel Family Support Program, in which a family who's welcoming a new baby is matched with a community volunteer. And that volunteer visits typically once a week for around 12 weeks after the birth or adoption of a new baby, and is there in the home for their visits, typically range from 1 to 2 hours. And they're there to provide emotional support, hands-on help, and help identifying and connecting the family with any other resources that they might need. And that can be um, parenting resources, it can be mental health support, it can be developmental services, it can be financial assistance, whatever that family is feeling would be most helpful for them. And that's our core service. And again, that's primarily something that's in home for families during those critical first 3 months after they welcome a baby. But generally, our services are targeting that perinatal period, which is any time in the months leading up to expecting to welcome a baby into your home, and up to a year afterwards. That is, the medical term for that is perinatal, but whether you're adopting or whether you're birthing yourself or whether you're, again, caring for a relative's baby, that relationship between the adults in the home and that newborn and the preparing ahead of time for that, that's all our core focus. So we offer workshops and educational resources for folks who are expecting a baby so that they can prepare for what they're going to need during that period and build a support system in advance. And we also offer groups and workshops and opportunities for families with new babies to connect with each other and start building their own support system and community after they welcome the baby. So we have a weekly caregiver circle for folks caring for infants. We provide baby wearing support. We have a lending library here at our office with all sorts of resources for new parents. And so it's sort of the community layer. We have this core in-home service that's really providing that very intimate, direct, hands-on support during those first few months. And then we have this larger community network of community resources that are just as much about education and information and resources as they are really about community connection and social support and building your tribe, as some new parents talk about, finding that community of support, that village that is going to help you and that you are going to contribute to and back in return. So a lot of social capital helping build those connections.
Sounds like very important community building and bringing people in. I often think about our culture has a tendency to focus on sort of primarily on those who work. And then the further you get from that, be it high schoolers that are then more accepted, and then maybe some retired seniors. But then once you get into nursing homes, they sort of drop out of the eye of general society. Similarly, as you get younger, once you get to preschool and certainly postpartum, it's just sort of not part of the community at large. And I always like things that are bringing in what we think of as sort of not the core of society into the entire community. I feel like it helps everyone.
Well, just the fact that you divided people into those who work and those who don't is kind of a construct, an artificial construct of
Absolutely.
modern society. And I was thinking about this when I was reviewing the questions you'd sent me in advance, because I don't like to. I think it's dangerous to romanticize the past. I think there are plenty of ways in which modern society has been a positive development and addressed things that there's that quote from the philosopher about how life was short, nasty, brutish, and short. And I think we've made some amazing advancements in terms of quality life, and yet this is a really modern notion, this idea that there's paid work that happens outside the home from 9 to 5 during the work week. And then there's all of this other stuff that just magically gets taken care of at no cost to society outside of the public eye. That came out of the Industrial Revolution and the creation of factory jobs. And prior to that, reproductive work and productive work, at any, for the very wealthy and also for the very poor, tended to all happen in the same place at the household level. And so you were much more aware of the work involved with caring for young children, caring for older relatives, members of the family. And that happened, side by side and hand in hand with the providing for the food and the clothing and the other sort of resources that the family needed. So anyway, again, I don't want to romanticize the pre-industrial era, but I do think it's really important that we made this conscious decision as a society to divide the two and to, for some reason, decide that one had value and prestige in society and the other didn't and was supposed to magically be taken care of by housewives at the time. And I think that's something that we need to address, because obviously raising the next generation is one of the most important kinds of work that we can be doing.
It's reminding me of a course I took in my freshman year on feminist economics is the name of the course. And it's one of the things that struck me the most and the biggest takeaways was the idea it laid out different priorities as reproduction, meaning sort of the survival of the species, not just literally reproduction, production being the building of goods, and finances, which is sort of the systems in which we create so that for our goods. And the general thesis that this professor was laying out was the idea that it used to be reproduction was key, production served reproduction, and finances serve production. And now we've got it inverted, was the argument. Finance is king. Production is to serve finance, and reproduction is to serve production. And it definitely got into men's sphere versus women's sphere philosophy within that. But that was the sort of the core of that course, was questioning whether this finance model we have that is an inversion of our priorities.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that sort of progression among the three, but I see that in our modern society, and I think the pandemic has really ripped away the curtain that usually masks that, and shown how care work and reproductive work underpins everyone's lives, and when we don't have support for that, everybody suffers. It's so I'm hoping that we'll come out of the pandemic learning from that experience and changing the way we structure our policy and the way we set a value for these different things. Yeah.
So what have been some of the biggest learnings during pandemic for Good Beginnings?
Um, for Good Beginnings, on a micro level, I think um, we have had to learn how to provide the support that we offer virtually. And that has been a huge challenge and a huge opportunity. Um, Prior to the pandemic, we definitely relied on the concept of holding the baby, going into the home and holding the baby as what we built all the other support around. And and um, and suddenly that wasn't an option. It wasn't safe for the volunteers or the families to be welcoming volunteers physically into the home, and yet at the same time, families were even more isolated than ever before because of the pandemic. So we had sort of the worst possible scenario. And I'm really proud of how we responded. We really learned a lot about the ways in which when you set aside the physical support of holding the baby, the other ways in which community support and social support and having someone to listen to, someone to talk to, someone to be a resource for you during that phase, it has a lot of value on its own. And we focused on retraining our volunteers on how to establish connection and provide support via phone and text. It's a totally different skill when you're not able to make eye contact and just use your physical presence to build a relationship with someone, when all you are a voice on a phone. That's a very different skill set. And we had a number of volunteers who were open to working with us to learn a new way of being with the families. It really focused on the mental health needs of families, and the need for a safe space, a safe place to talk about what you're going through and what you're feeling, and how you're experiencing the transition to parenthood. And so we were able to really, I think, up our game in terms of providing that kind of support to families. And we also found that there are some folks for whom that was actually a more useful and even a more comfortable way of being supported by their community. And we'd always noted that there were some families who were offered a volunteer but declined, and there was a sense that that there was some degree of discomfort with having a stranger come into the home, whether it's like pressure to make sure your house is clean, no matter how much we told them the volunteers are prepared for messy postpartum houses, some sort of anxiety about feeling internal pressure about having to host someone else, having to engage with someone else in that vulnerable time. And so we did feel like this situation enabled us to figure out a way to better reach those folks. Providing virtual support now is a thing, and we're going to continue doing it. And we're going to have a subset of volunteers who know how to do it well and who are signed up to provide support via phone and text. And so when we have families going forward who are uncomfortable with inviting someone into the home, we have something very real and very tangible to offer them.
So how have your numbers shifted during COVID as far as number of people getting services, numbers of volunteers? I don't know, numbers of people having children. There's a lot of factors, of course, in all of that. But what have you
Yeah.
noticed?
So we typically, for our Postpartum Angel program, which again is our core program where we match families with a volunteer, we typically serve about 100 families a year, and during the height of the pandemic, from April through late fall 2020, we did notice that we were serving about half that. And that was definitely, it was about half the numbers that we typically saw, but it was predominantly folks who really identified social support as a need. So it was very much folks who had a history of mental health challenges, or who were experiencing a mental health challenges at the time, or who recognized that they were very isolated, folks with a lot of needs. And I think what we saw drop off is there's always been a subset of folks who use our services, which we encourage and we are delighted with, who really purely wanted the hands-on help, wanted the chance to take a shower or a nap while someone else held their baby, which is definitely part of our original core service, and which was just not possible under COVID. So those folks were more likely to say thanks, but no thanks. Then over the course of the winter, we definitely saw an increase in people reaching out to us and specifically saying, I really need, do you have any volunteers who will come in person? I really need some respite. I really need some relief. And so we could see the mental health effects of the pandemic dragging on and people really feeling like they were at the end of their rope. And that has continued. So we are excited to hopefully get back to our original numbers as more and more volunteers get vaccinated and more people can safely go into homes again. I expect that we will be back to our regular numbers, and even more so because what we're hearing from the area hospitals is that there might be a baby boom this summer. A lot of expectant parents, they're seeing a lot of expectant parents, more so than towards the end of 2020. So we'll see.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground so far, and there's a few different directions I want to go with questions. But one is the training for your volunteers. What does it take to become a volunteer? What do you look for in a volunteer, and and what type of training do they go through?
Yes. Great. So we do have an application process for all our volunteers. There's an application on our website. So the first step is to go to the website and fill that out. We ask for references. We do a background check. And then once you've completed your application and we've checked your references, then there's a couple different components. There's a in-person 2-hour training that we provide. And then there's also other training resources that we ask volunteers to go through on their own. Our volunteers are mandated reporters, so they are expected to go through a webinar where they're oriented to the Department of Children and Families mandated reporter system, and how to handle situations if they are concerned about abuse or neglect in the home of a family they're visiting. And our training obviously covers that as well, and covers some of the more safety-oriented features, but our training focuses a lot on the perinatal period and the health and well-being of the caregivers. So we provide an orientation to the signs and symptoms of perinatal mental health disorders, and what to look for, and how to check in with families about that, what kinds of resources are available for folks, and a lot of coping strategies related to caring for baby and self-care. So we encourage volunteers to do additional training with us on things like baby wearing. In our orientation, we also focus on the 5 S's, which is a really useful strategy for soothing new babies. Obviously, that's a significant source of stress for any new parent is a crying baby, and not everyone has the opportunity to learn those skills. I mean, there's skills that you have to learn. I remember my husband and I reading the book about the 5 S's and practicing those skills and learning them. And so we teach those to the volunteers so they can help families work on them.
What are the 5 S's? Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, my kids are 7 and 11, and I'm not the one at Good Beginnings who does this training. And honestly, I think they've changed them since I learned them. So suck, the sucking urge. My husband found that when he held our daughter, he would give her his pinky. I breastfed, so obviously that's how I dealt with that S. But my husband would give her his pinky to suck. Sway, and then I think the one that's changed is it used to be shake, which actually means a very gentle jiggle, similar to what they would experience in utero when you're walking around. But I think for obvious reasons that what we learned as shake, with the huge caveat about how you don't shake a baby, I think they've adjusted that now. And I don't know what, suck, shake, swaddle, and side. Yeah, that was a see these just not to get too personal, but my elder daughter was when she was born, they said, "We've got a sucker." She had a huge sucking instinct. So all I needed of the 5 S's was the fact that I breastfed her. And I actually was really bad at the other 4, as you can tell, because I can't remember them. And if my partner were here right now, he would be able to tell you, because he relied on side. He held it. He did the football carry a lot, and a lot of shaking, and because he didn't have that option that I did. So it was interesting with the 2-parent combo, one parent breastfeeding, one parent not, to see how, in a way, he was the more he had the more diverse skill set, because he
Mhm.
he was forced to really embrace all 5 S's. And I admit, I relied
Yeah.
overly on breastfeeding.
You use what you have that
Yep,
works,
yep,
and
yep, yep. That
so,
was my superpower, so I used it. So but back to the volunteer orientation, we in that initial orientation, we give them a lot of tools like that. Some of them were parents decades ago and may not have consciously learned the 5 S's or baby wearing when they were parents. So we want to give them sort of an introduction to the full tool set, and also to the signs and symptoms of perinatal mental health disorders, as I mentioned. And then we also really want to orient them to our philosophy, which is about the caregiver. So what we're really looking for in a volunteer is someone who is there for the parent or caregiver. And sometimes we found that people express interest because they want to cuddle the baby. And we want people who love cuddling babies and who are good at cuddling babies, don't get me wrong. But we really want them to come into the home with an eye to, how is this caregiver doing? What do they need? So, for example, some families don't want the volunteer to hold their baby. They want the volunteer to empty the dishwasher, maybe spend a half hour playing with an older sibling, just converse with them, but they want to hold the baby. Like, that's a very important part of their um, approach to parenting, is they want maximum time skin to skin with that baby. And the volunteer is to enable them to do that, have someone else there to answer the phone if it rings, or make a meal for them. um, and so we want volunteers to be attuned to that, and not go in and just assume that every family is going to want them to hold the baby the whole time. So that's a big focus of our training, is um, first of all, screening volunteers for that ability to tune in on the parent and focus on the parent, um, and also giving them a structure by which they can go into the home and identify, okay, how can I best support this parent? Not how can I get my hands on this cute baby, but um, what is this parent going through? What can most support them? Because if you think about it, everyone gravitates towards the baby, right? And that's kind of part of the problem that we're trying to address, is that the parent caring for that baby kind of gets lost by the wayside a lot. So, um,
so you mentioned a screening process. Are beyond the background check, are there times where somebody well-intentioned just doesn't seem to fit the philosophy or what you're comfortable with going into homes? I'm not trying to get you to the small enough community. I'm not trying to have you like out anyone on this, but like what are sort of warning signs of like they're just not a good fit for this program and this particular task?
well, it is a fit thing, and we have tweaked our volunteer orientation process to kind of have those fit conversations up front. Because I think what we found is if we put a volunteer through all of the other steps of the application, checking their references, having them do a background check, having them watch these videos on mandated reporters information, and then get down to brass tacks and talk to them about the matching process. And we discovered that their interests and the needs of our families are not necessarily aligned. Then everyone's disappointed. I mean, volunteering is a wonderful thing, and we want to encourage everyone to volunteer, but we want everyone to find a volunteer role that speaks to their own passion and that brings them joy. And so we are really looking for folks for whom the joy is that connection with the parent. So what we've done is we start our orientation process after we get the application with a brief phone interview with the volunteers where we really emphasize the goals and the philosophy of the program and talk to them about it. And sometimes we do have folks who say, oh, okay, well, now that I'm talking to you about this, I'm realizing that it's not exactly how I envisioned it. And it could also be the time commitment. Sometimes folks may not realize that it is we're asking them to embark on a journey with each family that could be up to 12 weeks, of regular visits. Um, and so some folks, when they get into the particulars about that with us, realize, oh, that doesn't, I can't necessarily commit to that. So those are the things that we've found work really well if we just have a candid conversation with them up front. And then at that point, we're confident that everyone is on the same page. And we go forward with the rest of the application process. Yeah.
And it seems like, I mean, doesn't get much more personal than having somebody, especially when you had a home program where people are coming to the home, than someone coming into the home with you and your new baby. Um, are there, with the best of intentions, how often is it just not the right fit and of individuals interpersonally, culturally, whatever that may be? Is that
That's a big part of the role of our program director. And she has a lengthy conversation with every family who requests our service. And she also knows all of our volunteers very well, obviously. And so it is an art. I mean, we obviously have a number of things that we ask about and look for that, but there's also just a sense of the personalities and the interests and whether they're going to gel or not. And so we have a system for collecting as much information about each family's needs as possible to make a good match for them. I'll have to say that our program director, Anna, who has played this role for the past 7 years, was just phenomenal at just reading people via these phone conversations and making a good match. And also sometimes it just doesn't work out. So there's a small percentage of our matches that just for whatever reason don't really gel, and we are always willing to rematch a family in those cases if the volunteer and the family decide that it's not a good fit. And so that does happen. One or the other will come back to us and say, this isn't really working. And then our program director will talk to both the volunteer and the family to try to understand what aspect of the match was not a good fit and rematch the family.
Well, I want to just take a moment to make sure that listeners know that sort of my full disclosure is that I've utilized the program and quite appreciated it for our family, and we had an excellent match and still have a relationship with our visiting angel, um, and less so in COVID. So, of course, but. And really appreciate that work. So just to sort of the disclosure that I'm sort of a biased interviewer here because it's helped my family, and sort of the caveat I had at the beginning is like everyone's got their own circumstances. I personally think that it could help most people, but everyone's got their own individual situations. But with that in mind, I just, as a healthcare practitioner, I'm often thinking about sort of cultures and microcultures. I think we often think of cultures in the broad strokes of like um, color of skin and sort of very noticeable immediate things. Race, ethnicity, and maybe some religious practices, and all of those are important things to be aware of. But there's so many microcultures that exist, and I think that can be very it becomes more obvious in somebody's home, people's relationships with. I won't even try to I won't even try to say the different ways in which culture can play out, because it would actually be pigeonholing it too much and wouldn't catch the whole picture. But something as personal as child rearing, I guess some of the areas are of interest to me are sort of around touch, around how much you should be carrying the child, philosophies of whether or not you should be sleeping with your child, whether or not you should children should be in cribs, baby wearing, and then parenting, how much to encourage self-soothing, all those different things. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
are
Mm-hmm.
are very touchy issues.
Yes.
People have their own
Yes.
cultural belief systems around. I've got my own strong belief systems that likely are coming through it just in my line of questioning. But how do you encourage volunteers to navigate that? Um, it's because it's such a personal thing, and I mean, we already know you breastfed. That in and of
Yep.
itself is
Yep. 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 Yeah, it's sort of it's the dominant issue, question, concern for us, how people react to different parenting styles or decisions, and the how we deal with the judging that all parents experience, often unfairly about their particular choice. And to some extent, that's the lens through which we see all of these other sort of cultural differences at Good Beginnings when we're thinking about, um, some of the other ones that are, particularly, I don't, yeah, I think it crosses it just that question of parenting decisions and the way they're judged and the way they're viewed by society, and um, and and how you navigate that. It crosses class, it crosses race, it crosses um, gender and sexual orientation. It really it pervades everything we think about, and it is tough. We, for obvious reasons, it's really important for us to align ourselves with what the medical institutions, the Academy of Pediatrics, um, accept as safe and good practice. We wouldn't be able to do the work we did if we directly challenged the um, the experts. We are also a community-based organization, and deliberately, intentionally trying to support parents, and in navigating these decisions in a way that works best for their family. Um, I think that so the first step in that is with our volunteers. Part of the screening process, especially when we check their references, is that we ask their references to talk about their ability to um, appreciate different parenting approaches and styles. And we ask for specific examples of this. And we talk about it in terms of breast versus bottle, or cloth versus disposable, or cry it out versus co-sleeping. We don't take a hard stance on any of those things. We try to provide the information and the resources that are available, um, and support whatever decision the family feels is right for them. And so we look for volunteers who appreciate that and who demonstrate that quality. Um, we also focus on praising what a parent is doing right. So that's kind of one of the tools that we give our volunteers is look for the ways that the parent is doing something right, doing something well. Look for what's working and point that out. Um, our our job is not to judge or to even to teach. It's to support. And so we take that sort of strength-based approach, and then a volunteer might be in a position to make suggestions or offer resources if they see that. Um, and I think it's very specific. I mean, they might sense that a particular baby would do better if they were held more. If the parent would give baby wearing a try, this particular baby might really benefit from that. And so being able to suggest that that might be something that they try, rather than going and saying, baby wearing is this, 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 and this, So that's on the micro level in terms of how we encourage our volunteers to work with families.
So
Obviously, there's a lot to say about this, but
so I've talked with somebody, and this is not directly related to Good Beginnings, but someone who had considered being part of the Leche League, which is a
Mhm.
breastfeeding support group, I think national or international, I'm not sure.
Mm.
And I they their belief system around breastfeeding was so, as self-described, dogmatic, that breast milk is food and formula is not food, was this person's belief system, to the point that they realized that they were not a good fit for Leche League, which is about supporting breastfeeding,
Mhm.
because their personal belief system on this was going to get in the way of that um, they were very adamant about that belief. If you had someone who had that strong belief system who wanted to be a volunteer, is that someone who you'd say, you know what, maybe not the best to have you here? Or would you be trying to pair them up with somebody who in their interview as a parent was sort of like, I want someone who's not going to ever suggest formula or anything but breastfeeding? Would you try to utilize a volunteer like that?
Well, we do try to screen, we do try to identify those sort of very dogmatic beliefs going in. And that is a concern that we have about anything, that if a prospective volunteer expresses a very dogmatic stance on any number of things, that we take that into account and would probably give them pretty frank feedback up front, that we would expect them not to um, impose that view on a family. Uh, and and if we did go ahead with that volunteer, we would definitely keep that in mind, matching them.
Hmm.
Um, we want we want it to be a good fit for everyone.
Hmm.
So I can imagine a situation where a volunteer we feel like could be a really good fit for a certain kind of family, even given that, or because of that, perhaps, and that we would want to work with them and just be aware about what kind of family we match them with. And I can also see situations where that is also making a dogmatic statement like that about issue X is indicative of a temperament or a style that is probably likely to be a good fit for us more broad, not a good fit for us more broadly.
Hmm.
And so I think the conversation with them early on could go in either direction,
Yeah, you'd have to dig
and
deeper into that to see if they were a good fit, is what I'm hearing.
yeah,
Like that
yeah,
there might be a use for them, or it may just be that they're not fitting with the overall
right,
what you're
right.
looking for.
Because we do serve all kinds of families. We serve families that have come to us with all different kinds of views, and we regularly see volunteers that work wonderfully with a very particular profile of family, and we would never dream of matching them with another kind of family. And so we want to have a diverse pool to draw from, but we need them all to be respectful, to be good communicators, to be able to come back to us and tell us what they're seeing, and be open to feedback. So some of those sort of baseline people skills and respect need to be there.
Hmm. So, as we sort of further the question about different cultures, there's of course different family makeup. So we've got the classic image, I imagine, of Good Beginnings is mother who birthed the child, and and likely a father who's at that point back to work, sort of the sort of stereotypical heteronormative middle class family, or
Hmm.
um,
Right, right, right.
um, the what are I mean, we can all imagine different makeups of that: gender nonconforming, same-sex partners, and other relatives involved and such. How do you make sure you're supporting all of those? And I guess I will tack on to that sort of my own personal, what I can speak to as being a cisgender male, um, sort of men's role within that support.
I I'm really proud. I think Good Beginnings has made huge progress on this just in the last 3 or 4 years. I joined the organization in 2016, and I think our hearts were in the right place at that time. We were very committed to serving, parents of all genders, families of all makeups. There was no doubt in our mind that that's what we believed, but the language we used did not reflect that at all. The language we used in 2016, 17 was still very gendered. And we went through a really thorough process of reviewing and adapting our language um, in our expectant parent workshops, in our welcome baby booklet that we give to all families that we match with a volunteer. Through our other workshops on our website, we really took a step and um, and made a big leap towards not using mother and father, and not assuming the gender of the parents or the sexual orientation of the parents. And we talk about the breastfeeding parent and the birthing parent now, and we don't call our parent groups, we call them caregiver circles now, or baby circles. Not For years, they were called mama circles, which is not very inviting to other parents and caregivers who might be home with an infant and want to take part in this peer support network. So, and that I think language is very powerful, and going through that exercise and really looking at all the ways that even though we had these values, we were using this other language that reflected different values, and making that sort of universal shift in how we talked about things. I think that um, was a really, really important exercise for us. And we do see families and actively support families of all different makeups. Our founder was an adoptive parent herself, so she has always had a very strong interest in recognizing adoptive parents and not just birthing parents. So I can say that that's always been a focus of the organization, and that more recently we have really expanded on that, and we've had kinship care situations, a lot of same-sex partnerships, parents parenting solo, yeah. Um,
So
Sorry.
yeah, no, there's so many there's so many different makeups that a family could be, that it seemed that I we don't have the time to go into all of them, and it would be sort of sort of beside the point to some degree. But I guess I'm curious, as a man who has a to some degree more, stereotypical male body and posture. Um, I know that the way my sister carries a child and the way I carry a child, um, literally is different. We have different centers of gravity. I'm
Mm,
more comfortable holding a child higher up. I don't have as wide hips. I can't rest a baby or a young child on my hip the same way, but I'm more likely to put a child on my shoulders. That there's literally differences, sort of mechanical differences, not to say that like all men are one way and all women are the other, but there are mechanical differences between people in in what their tools can be. Is that what type of male support is there training for, sort of the more male body in working with children in any way, or thoughts on matching? Do you have male
uh-huh.
volunteers
We do have
that
male
support males
volunteers.
like?
We do have male volunteers. On I mean, I'll have to say the vast majority of the parents who reach out to us asking for support are um, female, or not necessarily cis female, but identify in some way as female. I probably cis male is the least common
Mhm.
um, uh, demographic in terms of the parent that requests the direct support. Um, so I think that's largely a function of other forces in society. I think.
Both whether the men are doing cisgender men are doing that work and whether they're asking for help when they are. I think
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
imagining it's both.
yeah, yep, yep. So it's complicated. I think with respect to holding a baby, there are so many aspects of baby wearing, and I am not the baby wearing expert at Good Beginnings at all. But I am tuned in enough to know that we really look at the needs and the height and the build and the style of the parent, and that we have helped all kinds of parents find the right way to wear their baby. Um, so I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of the different considerations for getting a good baby wearing fit and figuring out a carrier that's going to work for you. We get a lot of that, parents of different builds and sizes and who are going to want to use the carrier in different ways. And how can we get a carrier that will work for both parents in a two-parent household? So that's a pretty common request that we field a lot. Um, and yeah, it's tough. I love the fact that we have male volunteers. When this one particular volunteer came to us, I was so excited, and I was wondering if families would feel comfortable with him, because that had historically been the problem. It wasn't that we didn't have male volunteers, interested applicants who were male. It was that families who wanted to volunteer were uncomfortable with the idea of having a male volunteer, and that hasn't been the case with this particular volunteer. We've had great luck matching him, I think, primarily with um, female caregivers, um, and I that's probably it's probably partly his demeanor and his style as an individual, and it's probably partly also um, just the way society is evolving and changing and thinking differently about this. I haven't recently experienced a case where we worked with the family where the primary caregiver identified as male. I know we have in the past, but it hasn't been something that has caught my attention recently.
Mhm. Okay. Um, and I guess that's there's sort of two questions I have. One is how are you reaching out to the people who, for whatever reason, don't feel that they should be asking you for support or aren't comfortable asking for support? Um, I'm personally of the opinion that the more support you can give a new child, the better. So the more support you accept as a family, the better for that child. That's So I feel like everyone should be willing to, even if you've got a lot of supports, to um, to have a visiting angel. And that was my philosophy and my wife's philosophy when we wanted to make sure there wasn't a shortage and we weren't taking from families that needed it more than us. But sort of that's that idea of not wanting to take from families that need it more, or people who are hesitant to seek out the support.
Yeah, we do hear that on a regular basis from families, and um, again, the our program works because it's universal. I mean, that's what I would say. I think Anna might have a different answer to this when she's talking with an individual family. She's more the one-on-one, family person, and I'm more thinking at it from a larger programmatic, sort of strategic perspective. But this model only works if it's available to everyone. So it's much less effective if we start rationing it and saying, no, you don't meet the criteria. So that's how I think of that when people say, oh, I should decline because someone else needs it more than me. No, this is an important statement to make about how everyone needs this, and the more people who don't maybe outwardly seem like they need help accept this help, the easier it is for everyone to ask for the help. I mean, there's this like everybody needs help, and that's part of our original tagline. Anyone caring for a new baby needs a helping hand. Anyone. It's not it's not an indication of some deficit or, lack that some families have. Everybody can use this. And it's because of the phase of parenting and the situation. It's not because of who you are as a parent. Um, that's how I think of it. From like it's absolutely essential that everybody consider this a universal service that is available to everyone. And some people choose not to accept it, and we certainly don't push. You know, but we do encourage folks that they're not taking a volunteer away from someone else by any means. They're making this more available by accepting the help.
And then I guess my other question, not directly related, is mental health, which you've alluded to a few times, but mental health, both what we classically think of as concerns for mental health and what either signs or situations might people overlook when they're thinking about postpartum mental health.
Right. Yeah, that's a big focus for us because there's still such huge stigma associated with it, and it's also um, it tends to be stereotyped and defined way more narrowly than it should. We see just as much anxiety as we do depression. We see people having mental health needs during pregnancy. Um, Dads experience mental health changes and challenges when they're welcoming a new baby. And a lot of people still don't feel comfortable speaking up. Oh, and another point is that it's not just this 6-week thing that then goes away. You can experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder up to a year after you welcome a new baby into your life. So we really want people to know that this happens to a lot of families, up to 1 in 5. I mean, the statistics, you can sort of look at different ways of counting the statistics, but up to 1 in 5 new parents will experience some form of um, perinatal mood or anxiety struggle, either in the period leading up to the birth or during the 12 months after welcoming a baby. Um,
I think it was through Good Beginnings, one of the prenatal courses, sort of preparing stuff, and I think it was from there that I had heard sort of the statement of, we, at this point you're there's a pregnant likely woman in the and we're worried about the child and the birth going well, and that's a major concern, but that the chances of there being a problem with the birth may actually be, or something that's a major concern, may be significantly less than that of some postpartum mental health concern in the family. And that, and
it
that,
is the
that,
most common complication of childbirth, mental health. Yeah, mental
so
health complications are. Is that what you're talking about?
yes,
I'm not sure. Yeah,
yes.
yep. Yeah, and so everyone is so focused on the physical birth and the physical, immediate um, after effects of birth, but in fact, it's mental health complications that are the most common.
So what, I guess when we're talking about mental health, what supports sort of anyone who might be listening to this, who knows of somebody who they are concerned about, or themselves, who should they be reaching out to? I want to make sure that we have that right here.
Mhm. Yes, yes. Well, Good Beginnings for sure. If you live in Central Vermont, and we work closely with an international organization called Postpartum Support International, and they have a helpline. They have a 1-800 number helpline that you can call from anywhere, and then they also have local helplines. So we staff the local one here in Central Vermont. So they are a great first place to call if you're just needing to start talking to someone. Postpartum Support International.
And that doesn't have to be a crisis necessarily. It can
Mm-mm.
just sort of be a first step of like, well, what are the resources available to me?
Yep, yep.
Okay.
And
Can
you
you
can
make sure you,
call on behalf of someone else to, if you're seeing it in someone else, they'll talk to you
and if
about
you
how they
could,
can do.
yeah, if you could make sure you give me those numbers, I'll include them in the show notes so that anyone
Okay,
listening to this can have
great,
access to that.
great, great.
Um, okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, and I feel like we could have gone so much deeper. Almost any of these things. what what do you wish everyone realized more about the whole process of bringing a new person coming into the world? What do you wish was sort of in our mindsets more, or that either as a society or the individuals part of bringing that person into the world? Could be
Everything
more
I
than one thing.
said in the last hour. Well, yes, I definitely wish that people were more tuned into the mental health of new parents and caregivers of infants, and the role of social support. So there's three pillars of treatment for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders: talk therapy, pharmacology, and social support. So the kind of service that Good Beginnings does, or bringing over a meal, or just calling and checking in on someone, or helping them get out to a play date, that is a legitimate component of treatment for perinatal mental health disorders and complications. It's not just some nice thing that you can take it or leave it. So that's one thing. And yeah, to go back to what we touched on earlier in the conversation, that this is work. This is important work that needs to be valued by society. And I personally am a huge proponent of universal paid family leave. Um, and so I think that is huge. It's a huge gap in American society, that it's not a given that someone would be able to center this in their life when they are caring for an infant without worrying about losing their paid job. I
Okay,
could
well,
go on.
well, I think we'll leave it on that note for now. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was really great talking with you today.
Likewise, yes. Thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you.
You've been listening to Resilience Radio. We've been talking about postnatal care and the offerings at Good Beginnings. I hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, you can subscribe and in the podcatcher of your choice and get a new episode every week. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate a review and maybe sharing it with a friend. You've been listening to Resilience Radio. Take care.